Tonight, a story of murder.
Rae, did you do it?
Conspiracy.
You knew he was lying.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
And survival.
They had delivered Chancellor, and he was fighting for his life.
Panthers fans knew him as Rae Carruth. A first-round draft pick, a star wide receiver.
Steve Burline to Rae Carruth.
But for the last 19 years, he has lived as Ray Wiggins, North Carolina State Prison inmate number 0712822. Tonight, we go back.
I was the first officer on scene.
To the night in Charlotte that changed so many lives.
What part of the body been shot at? I don't know.
And she says, well, your daughter Sharika's been shot. And I'm like, don't play with me.
The search for justice in the calculated hit of a pregnant woman.
We had very little to work with.
The trial.
Bam, 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 bam.
And the jury's split decision that spared Rae Carruth's life.
Let him take a punishment, not of a little boy, but of a man.
Now, as he prepares to walk out of prison, Chancellor Lee, his son born during tragedy, walks tall as a man.
Say, hey, Mommy Angel.
Hey, you boy, hey, you.
The challenges he's faced every single day.
Every part of his brain was affected.
And the people who've helped him all along the way.
I feel blessed to know Lee the way he is right now. He's going to change the world as he is.
Life after death, Rae Carruth and the son who survived.
There was life and death, you know, from the very beginning of the story.
The ambush and murder of Sharika Adams and the attempted murder of her unborn son, Chancellor Lee, is a case that crossed so many boundaries. It became bigger than Charlotte and the former Carolina Panther at the center of it all. On Monday, October 22nd, Rae Carruth will complete nearly 19 years in prison and re-enter a world where a dedicated grandmother and a loving community helped raise his son. From the very beginning, Eyewitness News pushed to hear from Rae Carruth to get his side of the story. I finally had the chance to speak with him exclusively just days before his release.
Yes, I speak to Erica.
This is Erica.
Erica, this is Rae Carruth.
You've never had a chance to just talk, and so you had some things you wanted to say.
I guess, honestly, I just want to truly be forgiven.
Carruth told me freedom won't feel right without a relationship with his son, Chancellor Lee.
My life, without making that situation right, won't be as good regardless of where I'm at or what I'm doing. It just will never sit well to me. My conscience will never be right until I find a way to be a part of my son's life and help make a difference. That's what means the most to me.
Throughout this hour, you'll hear Rae Carruth explain to me how he wants to build that relationship with his son and what his life has been like behind bars. First, let's take a look at how this story began.
It looked like an all-American success story, and Rae Carruth was the star. After standout high school and college careers, Carruth's football dream came true. Despite a foot injury that sidelined him in his second year, Carruth seemed to have it all. He was young, rich, and in the spotlight for Charlotte's new favorite team.
Carolina Panther Rae Carruth has been arrested and charged on 3 charges in connection with the shooting of his pregnant girlfriend, Sharika Adams.
America had seen this story before. A beautiful woman murdered, a football star on the run. It had been 4 years since O.J. Simpson. Just like Simpson's trial, Carruth's case was on national TV. It was a spectacle. It was surreal. A city that 6 years earlier didn't even have an NFL team now had a football star on trial for murder.
I'm 286 pounds. Okay, I would rip you like a rag doll.
This drama played out for months.
He gave me $100 and he told me to take his friend to get the gun.
Testimony about drug deals, about a darker side to a quiet, almost childlike football player, and about a plot to kill. This isn't just the story of an athlete's dreams, of the nightmare that ended Sharika's life, or the birth of hope in Chancellor Lee. This book is still being written. Tonight, we're digging into the moments, decisions, and twists of fate that brought us to this current chapter, and uncovering how Rae Carruth and the son who survived plan to turn the next page.
He was born Ray Lamar Wiggins, but used his stepfather's surname, Carruth. And Carruth is the name that captured national headlines following the murder of Sharika Adams. Reporter Mark Becker covered the case as it unfolded, and tonight takes us through its twists and turns with the investigators who lived it.
It began as a night at the movies. A football star and his pregnant girlfriend driving to a South Charlotte theater with 2 tickets to a film called The Bone Collector.
He needs her to go where he can't.
It was a tense murder mystery with a police detective trying to track down a killer.
This crime scene was staged. There's no question the perp knows forensics.
As she drove home from the theater that night, Sharika Adams had no idea that she was about to become the victim in a very real murder mystery. One where the prime suspect would be her boyfriend, Carolina Panther Rae Carruth. A mystery that would start with her own desperate call to 911.
911, Baker Street Police, fire panic. Police have been shot. You've been shot. Where are you at? Listen to me, you're on.
Clearly in pain and struggling to stay conscious, Sharika tried to tell 911 operators where she was and what had happened to her.
I was following my sister's dead. Rae Carruth, the public. They think he did it. He slowed down, and the car pulled up beside me. And then shot at you? Yes.
I wasn't actually originally assigned to the call itself, but I was close by and I figured, why not? You know, it seemed like a simple accident. It ended up being far from that.
Peter Grant was the first officer to get to Sharika that night. The driver's side window of her car had been shattered with 5 bullet holes, but somehow she was alive.
She's obviously conscious, talking. She's in somewhat of a state of shock at that point in time. It was very traumatic what happened to her.
Grant stayed with Sharika as an ambulance rushed her to the hospital, still alert and still talking.
I'm trying to get the information of who she is, and she's more concerned about telling me that her baby's daddy was the one who...
That her baby's daddy was the one who...
Yep.
Did it.
Rae Carruth, yeah.
So my first assignment was to go to the hospital.
Detective Darrell Price would get to the hospital later that morning.
When I got there, the family was there. She has a pretty large family. And at some point that morning, Rae Carruth came in. That was the first time I saw him, and the family pointed him out and said, this is her boyfriend, Rae. He's a Carolina Panthers football player. Of course, I didn't know him.
Price spoke briefly with Carruth, but his focus was on Sharika. Doctors had delivered her baby with an emergency C-section, and soon after, a nurse came out and took Price back to her room.
She was very cognizant of what was going on around her. She was intubated. She had a breathing tube in, so she couldn't talk.
Unable to talk, Sharika scrawled her answers on a piece of paper. She told Price they'd left the theater in separate cars.
Then afterwards, she said that she was following Rae and that somebody pulled up beside her and shot her. And, you know, we asked the question, do you think Rae had anything to do with this? And she just drew a question mark.
It was a question mark.
It was a question mark.
A question mark. But for detectives, it would also be a starting point.
Did you suspect him from the beginning?
Well, you had to. I mean, Sharika Adams called in and said that pretty much named him as stopping in front of her, and she believed that he was involved in it.
Sergeant Tom Athey led the investigation, and they would start by talking with Rae Carruth.
What did he say?
He didn't really know anything about anything at that time.
First interview, he's basically still the bereaved boyfriend and father, and you know, he don't know what happened.
Before they left, Athey casually asked Carruth to see his cell phone. It would be the key to unlocking the case.
Right. We knew what numbers he was calling and what numbers were calling Rae.
They saw Carruth had made several calls within minutes of the shooting, and by tracking those calls to specific cell phone towers, they could find out where he was.
That was kind of the first time we ever used cell phone triangulation to pinpoint a location.
At first, Carruth had told them he was miles away when the shooting happened, but the towers would tell a different story.
We were able to triangulate where the cell phone calls were coming from, and they were in the same exact spot she was shot in. So we knew he wasn't over off of McKee Road. We knew he was on Rae Road.
You knew he was lying?
Oh yeah, without a doubt, we knew.
Searching Carruth's cell phone records, they saw he'd placed several of those calls to a 24-year-old named Michael Kennedy, and they brought Kennedy in for questioning.
So we told him, we believe that you didn't kill anybody, but we also know that you were there because your cell telephone shows up at the location where this occurred. So after some amount of time, he eventually tells the story.
What did he tell you?
That he had met at Rae Carruth's house with another person that I believe he called New York, described him, said he'd never met him before, and that he was in a car with this New York and another person. I believe his name was Stanley Abraham, and that they waited on a call from Rae Carruth to follow them back to her house, and that at some point Rae Carruth pulled in front of her, put his brake lights on, stopped where she couldn't go anywhere. Their car pulled alongside of hers, and New York fired shots into her car.
It didn't take long for detectives to identify New York as Van Brett Watkins, a man who hadn't been on their radar before.
We went out and picked him up, and now he had a very violent criminal history, so now we're kind of on to something, like how is Rae Carruth connected to this guy with this many violent felonies?
For hours, Watkins insisted he didn't know Rae Carruth, but then something detectives never saw coming changed his attitude.
It was the holidays, so we went and got him a plate of food. We had a unit dinner or lunch that day, so we fixed him a plate. We were sitting down eating, and on the television there just happened to be a press conference going on, and Rae Carruth was speaking in that press conference, and a reporter asked him, what do you think ought to happen to the person that did this? And he said, well, I think they ought to get the death penalty. And that's when Watkins just put his fork down and he said, let's go back to the room. And we went back in the room, and he laid it all out for us.
Watkins told detectives he wanted them to know the truth. He admitted he'd fired the shots, but that the one who was calling those shots that night was Rae Carruth.
And I think had he not gotten so angry, had he not seen that interview, he would have never confessed. And had he never confessed, it would have been a lot harder to connect the dots.
So a plate of food and a TV interview basically did it.
Sometimes you just get lucky.
By then, police had picked up the third person in that car, a teenager named Stanley Abraham. So there was only one person left to bring in, Carruth himself.
Once we went to his house and told him he was under arrest.
How did he react?
Well, first he had to put his clothes on. He was completely naked, and he had another girl in the house with him.
Wait a minute. His girlfriend's lying in the hospital, but he's already got another girl in the...
Right. Comes to the door completely naked.
Carruth got dressed and went with detectives to the police department.
Once he gets down, he's confronted with everything.
Denial or not, he was under arrest. Carruth posted $3 million bond and was released from jail, still saying nothing publicly about his role in the shooting. Meanwhile, detectives turned their attention back to the hospital and Sharika Adams, who was slowly slipping away.
Based on all the medical advice that we were getting from the hospital, there's no way she was going to survive that.
So it's just a matter of time.
We're just waiting.
The waiting ended on December 14th. 4 weeks after she was shot, Price was called back to the hospital.
I didn't have a lot of faith that she was going to pull through, but I know the family, you keep faith going until the day it happens, and I know that it crushed them.
Sharika Adams had died, and Rae Carruth was now facing a murder charge.
I think Darryl was still at the hospital, and he called us and said, hey, she's passed away at this time. So we go and look for Rae Carruth, and he's not there.
Carruth was on the run, and detectives were scrambling to find him.
Well,
then they got a call from an unlikely ally. the bondsman who put up the millions to get Carruth out of jail.
I don't remember the date, but I do remember him calling over and talking to us and said, I just got a phone call from someone in Tennessee, and Rae is in Tennessee.
But we found out where we believe he's at. So we wanted to go and pick him up. We get overruled, and they want to send, I think, the FBI out to find him.
With the FBI now on the case, agents in Nashville got in touch with the young woman who called the bondsman, and they closed in on Carruth.
They make contact with this girl at this hotel, and she kind of motions that he's not here, but kind of gives a motion that points to the car, toward the car. And eventually they open the trunk, and there pops Rae.
It was one final ironic snapshot from a twisted script that had seen a young mother murdered and a young man transformed from football star to suspected killer.
Here's a guy that potentially could be a multimillionaire at a very young age, winds up in the trunk of a car somewhere in Tennessee.
With a pee bottle.
With a pee bottle and some money, trying to hide from the police.
Of course, that wasn't the end of the Rae Carruth story, but it was the end of a chapter that captivated this community for more than a month as we hung on every development of that investigation.
And of course, Mark, it didn't end there.
No, it would be another year before that case would go to trial, and when it did, it brought its own set of surprises. We'll take you behind the scenes of that monumental case later on.
We have expanded coverage of the investigation into this case on our WSOC-TV app. Mark walks you through the critical evidence from the gun to the phone records. Download the WSOC-TV app for free on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire.
Sharika Adams, pregnant, shot, critically injured. Now the frantic rush to save her baby.
They had delivered Chancellor, and he was fighting for his life.
Doctors weren't going to let him die.
We knew he was a fighter.
Coming up, one of those doctors recalls the emotional final moments between mother and son.
I've never taken a baby up knowing that mom was getting ready to die like that in 33 years.
Then, locked up for 50 years, the shooter speaks from prison.
Do you think you're a scary guy? Nah.
He claims if he could relive the crime, his target would change.
I should have killed him.
Fiery new correspondence with the killer as life after death continues.
One thing that we kind of knew about Rae was that, he was just a quiet guy to himself.
They shared the field on game day. Frank Garcia was one of Rae Carruth's teammates. He recalls uncertainty in the locker room when the arrest happened.
Little old Charlotte, now in the national picture for murder.
And closure when the verdict was read.
I trust that when they convicted him, that he was guilty. And when you're guilty, you may say you're sorry, but you still have to pay for your crime.
Survivor. The son of Rae Carruth and Sharika Adams, Chancellor Lee, embodies that word. Nearly 19 years ago, his fight to live was just beginning. He beat the odds, and those who witnessed it all still call it a miracle.
She had actually had 4 bullets in her. She was shot at 5 times.
A desperate 911 call in the middle of chaos captures how Sharika Adams saved her son.
To me, she gave her life to save her baby. And that's just the best that any mother could do.
Sharika's own mother, Sandra Adams, still marvels at the sacrifices made in those critical moments. Chancellor Lee Adams was delivered by emergency C-section just in time.
He was very dependent on her for his for maintaining his oxygen levels, and because babies get that from the placenta.
His mother had lost a lot of blood, depriving him of oxygen. Soon after he was born, Dr. Dosha Hickey took over his care.
At the beginning, was not able to breathe on his own. He needed help. He had a seizure early on, but he only had one.
She says within weeks, Chancellor Lee proved he was going to survive the violence that brought him into this world much too soon.
We knew he was a fighter, and you saw it because he came off the respirator. He cried, he took a bottle. He was a feisty little thing and would cry, and you look at him and you sort of, he was a sweet little boy. I mean, that was the best way to describe him. He was sweet, he was a good baby.
Dr. Hickey was also there when Chancellor Lee was taken to the ICU to be with his mother. It would be the first and last time.
We had gotten word that Sharika was not going to make it, and the family requested that he be taken up to be with her. I will never forget that. No, I'll never forget that moment. And put a blanket and laid him down on her chest and let him be with her for a while. He was quiet and just sort of laid there and didn't cry, didn't do anything.
She says his eyes were wide open and he was peaceful. Sharika was unconscious. She died later that day.
We just haven't lost. And everything that was meant for evil, God has turned it around and made it for good.
Sandra Adams was determined that not only would Chancellor Lee be alive, he would thrive. It's been her mission for nearly 19 years now.
We would go to the neurologist and she would tell me how he's not gonna be able to hold a bottle and he's not gonna be able to eat and drink, and you know, I can pretty much expect a life pretty much in a vegetative state, and I just rebuked that under my breath every time they told me that. Oh! I just knew God had better. He didn't let Chancellor survive just to be in a vegetative state.
It's a miracle that Dr. Hickey says she is honored to have witnessed. A mother fighting for her son to live, then a grandmother fighting for her grandson to live up to his potential.
He's done amazingly well. I know he has cerebral palsy, but he is a happy young man.
And what kind of ministry are you in? Oh, wow. The Smile Ministry? Yeah.
So I'm very, very proud of him. I'm even more proud of her because there's no other way to describe it. She's a wonderful lady. She's a saint.
With the love of his grandmother and many strangers, Chancellor Lee has thrived. I have much more of his story for you still ahead. His life today and the people guiding him into life as an adult.
But first,
I'm 286 pounds. Okay, I would rip you like a rag doll.
The jury hears from the trigger man.
Bam, 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 bam.
Emotions and hurt that were just beginning to heal forced back to the surface.
I hated to relive everything.
We go behind the scenes of Rae Carruth's trial with the insiders who were there.
We had some real concerns about Sharika Adams' statements being admissible.
The verdict and the silence from a man with everything to lose.
This is Channel 9 Eyewitness News, 6 o'clock.
A judge hands down the sentence in the trial of Rae Carruth.
The trial to me was no more than just a circus.
Rae Carruth. Oh, that's the I was referring to, who got me into this.
Chief Prosecutor Gentry Caudell told me that he's lost 10 pounds during these 3 months.
Let him be held responsible for the acts that he's done.
It is the judgment of the court that the defendant be in prison for a period of not less than 196 months.
At least 18 years in prison. That was the sentence for Rae Carruth. It could have been death. Carruth never spoke in open court and never took the stand to share his side of the story. Mark Becker takes us behind the testimony, the tension, and the verdict.
Exactly 1 year and 4 days after Sharika Adams was shot, prosecutors would begin to make their case to a jury that the man behind her murder was her boyfriend, Rae Carruth, and their first witness would be Sharika herself.
What part of the body you been shot at? I don't know.
In an agonizing call to 911, her voice trembling with fear and pain, Adams pointed clearly to Carruth.
How'd this happen? I was following my big dad, Rae Carruth, the football player.
So you think he did it?
He slowed down, and the girl pulled up beside me.
And then shot at you?
Yes.
She was hanging on for dear life, trying to save her life and that of her babies.
Gentry Caudill led the prosecution team that would show jurors the words Sharika had scrawled on a pad of paper at the hospital, describing how Carruth had stopped his car in front of hers, blocking her, while another car pulled up and the shooting started. It was chilling testimony from the grave, but prosecutors knew they would need more.
But we had valid concerns about the admissibility of those statements. And the statement of the 911 did not put him actually at the scene at the time. So as the trial approached, we were ready to go with what we had, but we still felt we were in bad need of testimony from co-defendants, and we were getting nowhere.
With time running out, they offered plea deals to all three of Carruth's co-defendants. Only one agreed, the man who'd fired those fatal shots, Van Brett Watkins.
So we finally made the hard decision to accept a plea of guilty to all the charges, second-degree murder and the other charges from Van Brett Watkins, and use him as a witness.
Watkins figured to be the prosecution's star witness, but he was far from the perfect witness. He'd flashed a violent temper with police in their interviews.
He got combative to the point where he stood up like he wanted to have a physical confrontation with them.
And on the witness stand, prosecutors knew he could be a wild card. But just as the trial was beginning, they got a break.
During the jury selection, a surprise development occurred when Kennedy's attorney came to us and said that Kennedy wanted the truth to come out and he was willing to testify without a plea arrangement.
Kennedy was Michael Kennedy, the 24-year-old who'd admitted he was driving the car Watkins was in when he fired the fatal shots. With his attorney's blessing, Kennedy agreed to testify without a plea deal. And he told the jury why Carruth wanted Sharika out of the way.
She was trying to juice him for money, and he was already paying like almost $5,000 in child support.
And more importantly, he also put Carruth at the murder scene.
Rae went over a hill and then down in a dip. Then he stopped his car. She stopped behind his. I stopped behind her. Then Watkins told me to pull up beside her car. So I pulled up beside her car, and he started shooting at her car.
Kennedy's testimony was powerful, but Carruth's attorney, David Rudolph, would have an answer.
He was simply covering up his own drug dealing, so he had to come up with some explanation of why he happened to be driving the car.
And that explanation, Rudolph would argue, was that Rae Carruth was in fact the real target of the shooting that night because he'd backed out of a drug deal with Kennedy and Watkins and was afraid.
Did Rae see them pull up next to Sharika? Yeah. Did Rae stop? No. Rae took off because Rae was afraid that Watkins was after him.
To make his case, Rudolph chose not to put Carruth on the stand. Instead, he called two unlikely witnesses. A sergeant at the Mecklenburg County Jail who said Van Brett Watkins had told her about the drug deal gone bad.
But it was Ray's fault. If he had just given us the money, none of this would have happened.
But it was Watkins himself who would be the cornerstone of Carruth's defense.
Van Brett Watkins is a psychopath, a sociopath.
Rudolph knew that putting Watkins on the stand would be a risky move. But he also knew that if he wasn't the perfect witness, Watkins could also be the perfect villain.
I fired one shot and 4 more shots.
Bam, 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 bam.
Watkins appeared cold, almost heartless, as he described how he shot Sharika that night. But as Rudolph pushed and prodded, his temper took over.
I'm 286 pounds. Okay, I would rip you like a rag doll.
Watkins' threat was an unforgettable moment. And another came when he pointed across the room at Rae Carruth.
This is the I was referring to. He didn't stand up. I stood up for mine. I say I did it. I did it because he made me do it.
Watkins' wild testimony was riveting, and it would make a huge impression on the jury.
Van Brett Watkins' demeanor certainly did influence the jury, because he was an inhuman person in the perception of everyone on that jury.
Herb Brown is a retired attorney who was one of those jurors. And 18 years later, Watkins' testimony is still fresh in his mind.
That man was an animal. He had no conscience whatsoever.
Finally, after dozens of witnesses and 2 months of testimony, prosecutors and Carruth's attorneys made their closing arguments. 4 days later, jurors came back with their verdicts. In a surprising twist, they found Carruth guilty of planning Sharika Adams' murder, but not guilty of the murder itself. A split decision that left both sides disappointed and puzzled.
Do you recall what you thought when you heard that verdict come down?
I was surprised.
Was it a loss for you then?
Well, as I said, I was surprised and disappointed. I'll leave that call for someone else.
Did you see it as a win when the jury came back with that verdict?
Not at the time. Looking back on it now, it's a win, because Rae Carruth is going to be paroled. He's got the whole rest of his life ahead of him. He could have been on death row.
In one final irony, the man who so wanted to destroy Rae Carruth, Van Brett Watkins, may have saved his life, because in the eyes of the jury, he became the real monster behind what was a monstrous crime.
And this was the trial, the biggest one Charlotte had ever seen. Our Glenn Counts covered it. Glenn, you told me for you, you've seen nothing compared to this before or since.
Well, Erica, there's no question this was Charlotte's trial of the century. I mean, we didn't have a big top. It was a circus-like atmosphere. We didn't have a big top, but we had a tent city outside with media who came in from all over the country. And of course, we had a lot of people showing up for the trial, you know, people who just wanted to be seen. And also, we had people who just wanted to show up just to say that they were a part of it.
And some of the most intriguing testimony came from the trigger man.
Absolutely. Van Brett Watkins. What a character. Now, I've been writing back and forth with him for weeks. Now, he said he would speak with me for this program if we met a list of demands. One of those demands, buying him a book on prison uprisings. Of course, we weren't about to do that. But in his letters to me, we did learn about the anger he still holds for Rae Carruth. My supporters wish me to cease doing interviews, Watkins wrote, but he added, I do wish to tell the public a few points of concern. This is Watkins in his most recent prison photo. He told me an interview with me would be as a rebuttal to Rae Carruth and called him a name we can't repeat here. The last time Channel 9 spoke with Van Brett Watkins was back in 2003. He told our Jim Bradley about his conversion to Islam.
Part of being a man is recognizing what you did. Yeah, I did.
Those sins weighed on him, he said.
Every day I think of Miss Adams. Every day I think of Chancellor. And every day I think of Sharika Adams and the wrong that I did.
It's also clear that he thinks about Rae Carruth a lot. He wrote, I detest liars. Liars are destined for hellfires, a similar sentiment to 15 years ago.
If you had a chance to say something to Chancellor, what would you say?
Don't trust your father, son.
In these recent letters, Watkins pointed out that he had owned up to what he did, writing, all I have is my word, and I always tell the truth, even against myself. Watkins, now 44 years old, has at least another 20 or 30 years before he could ever have the chance to face Rae Carruth as a free man again.
I think of my whole life every day. So as if it's a man dying and they say, well, his whole life flashes in front of him. Well, this occurs for me every day.
And he wishes one of those moments that still flash by had played out differently.
If I could change things, I should have killed him.
And let me just say that Van Brett Watkins was without a doubt the most intimidating man I have ever seen. My impression was, looking into those eyes, no fear whatsoever and no regard for human life. And by the way, by the time he gets out of prison, he will be in his mid-70s at the earliest.
So what about the others involved? Michael Kennedy pled guilty to conspiracy and second-degree murder and served 10.5 years behind bars. Stanley Abraham pled guilty to assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill and shooting into occupied property. Abraham served 3 months, then was put on probation. A simple phrase,
I've got you, Lee,
with so much meaning.
Right there is good, Lee.
Every step Chancellor Lee takes,
Big steps are better than small steps, Lee.
is traced back to the people who have surrounded him with love.
You can make it 10? You can do it. You can do it.
Tonight, for the first time, you'll see firsthand just how hard he works to overcome his challenges.
Ready?
Yeah.
The unwavering determination. The inspirational moments.
He's got this smile that will light up the whole room.
And the ways this incredible young man is making his mark and making a difference.
Over the past few weeks, I've spoken with Rae Carruth several times by phone. We had planned to meet face-to-face to bring you his first interview. He agreed, but the head of North Carolina's prison system denied our request to see him. But on the phone, Carruth spoke about disappointment, responsibility, and the next chapter of his life that he said he hopes will include his son.
Rae Carruth is getting his freedom.
I'd love to have the opportunity to make things right with her and Chancellor.
But he's hopeful for something more.
I've apologized to Miss Adams for the loss of her daughter and taking responsibility for what happened. I don't want to harm Miss Adams. I guess, honestly, I just want to truly be forgiven.
Carruth and Sandra Adams have both told me they wanted Chancellor Lee to meet his father. Over the past few months, they wrote to each other trying to work something out. The meeting never happened.
It's unfortunate, too, because I was really looking forward to the opportunity to see my son, to touch him, to hug him, to kiss him. You know, all these things that I've never had an opportunity to do. And I wanted to apologize to him in person for all that he's been through.
Can you understand how, in her heart, she may truly want to have you meet Chancellor Lee, and maybe in this moment, with the emotions that are flowing back and reliving everything in her mind as you're about to walk out of those doors, how maybe just at this moment, it's not something she can do?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I know it's that 100%. That's why I said that I'm not taking it personally. We just need some more time. That's all. So I'm going to be patient. I'll continue to make myself available. And when Miss Adams is ready, I'll be ready.
You said that you wanted to contribute to Chancellor Lee's life. Does that also mean financially?
Absolutely. Whatever I can do for my son, I will. I don't feel like the burden should be Miss Adams alone, or even the kind individuals who have aided her and assisted her in helping care for my son. That's still my responsibility. For as long as I'm alive, it's my responsibility to help take care of my son. He will never have his mother in his life. Right or wrong, he still has the opportunity to have me in his life.
In my 15-minute conversation with Carruth, he said he respected Miss Adams' decision, but still struggled with it.
I understand that she has every right not to allow me to ever see him. But at the same time, I don't think that that's what's best for him. You know, how can I do right by my son if I'm never given the opportunity?
An opportunity that he must recognize may take a lot of work to gain the trust of Sandra Adams, trust broken in the conspiracy to have her daughter killed.
What perplexes me is Miss Adams speaks more positively about the man that actually killed her daughter than she does about me. And Sharika was no stranger to him. He knew her better than I did. I mean, come to think of it, she's never made one negative comment about Van Brett Watkins. And he's a real killer. And from what I've heard, a man that still has killing on his mind.
Carruth refused to talk more about the past and seemed anxious about the future.
I really don't know how to feel. I know that this was a very huge undertaking, 18 years and 11 months. This was not easy. At times physically challenging, more often than not mentally and emotionally challenging. This was difficult. So I am grateful to be ending this and getting out of here. But at the same time, I have to admit, I'm ashamed and embarrassed to have ever been associated with this crime.
What he could talk about is Chancellor Lee, with whom he hopes for a second chance. Do you know how much he looks like you?
I've known that since the day he was born. It was like looking at myself. So yes, I do know. Actually, I think he looks like both of us. But yes, I do see the similarities between him and I.
More of that conversation is still ahead. I asked what these final days in prison are like as he nears release on Monday. But first,
I tell him what a good athlete his daddy was and how he's got those strong legs and that muscular body like his dad. And and you can do anything, right?
I've been fortunate enough to spend time with Sandra and Chancellor Lee Adams many times over the years, and each time I must tell you it is a blessing. Despite what seemed like insurmountable odds at his birth, Chancellor Lee survived, but more than survived, he's thrived. And his part of the story is undoubtedly the most important one of all.
Nicely. Can you put that arm down for me, please, sir? It's all right.
There's not been a day of his life when Chancellor Lee Adams hasn't had to fight.
Kick it out as you step over. Yeah, and pick it up. Perfectly.
On this day, he's fighting to walk a straight line. It isn't easy, but this battle goes back to the very beginning. From his first breath, Chancellor Lee to those who know him best, has been fighting. When his mother, Sharika Adams, refused to have an abortion, Lee's father, former Carolina Panther Rae Carruth, conspired to have both of them killed. Born premature, Lee fought to stay alive, and he won that battle, but with conditions. The gunshots robbed him of oxygen in the hours before his birth. The result, cerebral palsy, and the journey has been full of challenges.
There was life and death, from the very beginning of the story.
His grandmother, Sandra Adams, is the one who has seen the worst and the best of Lee's story. She's the one who's made sure he never forgets his mother.
She's looking down on you and loving you so much. Yeah.
And she's told him what she thinks he can understand about his father.
I tell Chancellor that his father did a terrible thing, and he's away now.
She's also made it a mission.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come and share my story with you.
To take Lee's story and use it for good.
Both genders can be subjected to domestic violence.
They speak to jail inmates about the realities and the pervasiveness of domestic violence.
Sharika would have never thought in a million years that Rae would have been plotting to kill her.
And she has given her all to her grandson, committed to helping him live the best life he can. Which brings us back to that physical therapy room.
Let's do it first with the handheld, okay?
Okay. Lee is now 18 years old.
Right, Lee.
Amy Sturkey has been his physical therapist since he was 7. She knows him as well as almost anyone, but even she admits it's hard to describe just what it's like to be in his presence.
You're at a loss for words when you try to explain Lee, because there's something about him that makes your heart want to go pitter-patter when you see him. And that's not true just now that he's a handsome young man, but ever since he was in my room. He's got this smile that will light up the whole room.
And that smile is almost always there. Almost. Make no mistake, this therapy is hard. While his father could run a play with the best of them, there is no running for Lee. Perhaps there never will be. Every step is work.
Oh, it's okay. This is the tricky side. Everybody has a tricky side.
A simple walk down the hall is draining, which shows on his face. But mostly it's fierce determination. And always at the end, that smile.
He seems very strong.
He is very strong. But there is a difference between strength and coordination of that strength. So he tends to recruit way too many muscle groups and learning how to relax one side so the other side can work and them to be able to alternate smoothly. All right, Lee. All right, let's go up to my hand. Let's go 10 times. 1, 2.
His grandmother is always there with her own smile.
Let's go mild push this time.
Yeah.
1, 2.
And a thumbs up, cheering him on, celebrating each success.
Yeah.
I never fill his mind with disability. He's able differently. And I don't focus on what he can't do or what he can do.
5. All right, get out of here.
Part of his therapy on this day involves stepping over obstacles, which seems all too fitting. It's something he's been doing his whole life.
Kick it out as far as you can. Lee, that was perfect.
I think Lee understands he is who he's meant to be, and I know he feels celebrated.
Thank you.
He's a charmed, blessed individual that when people ask me about him, I can't really say much, but what I can say is I hope you get to meet him one day, because I think it changes your life when you meet Lee.
Amy Sturkey believes that Lee inherited much of his physical strength from his father. She says for a young man with cerebral palsy, he is incredibly strong. She calls him a rock star, and that he is. Still ahead, Rae Carruth's time behind bars, from the trade he learned and his feelings about his upcoming release. Plus, a special message from Sandra Adams to her grandson that you won't want to miss.
Rae Carruth is now left to spend years behind bars, and he's already made it clear how he feels about that. He wrote a poem back in July that likened being in jail to being a caged animal in the zoo. One line reads, "Ever ask yourself if they could remember how it feels to be free, or if all their memories had faded, living life in captivity?"
That captivity is coming to a close. On Monday, Rae Carruth will be released, having paid his debt to society that a judge imposed in 2001. And a lot has changed since then.
In January 2001, Rae Carruth entered the state prison system in handcuffs. He was 26 years old. Gas was $1.46 a gallon, and President George W. Bush was beginning his first term. Carruth managed to stay under the radar for the majority of his time in prison. The state lists just 4 infractions on his prison record, the most recent, fighting, and that was 14 years ago. He served time in several facilities, with his final stretch as a minimum security inmate at Samson Correctional Institution near Clinton, North Carolina. He spent time learning a trade and made up to $3 a day as a prison barber. Just days ago, Carruth told me what it will feel like to leave prison behind.
I'm excited just by being out of here. Nervous just about how I'll be received by the public. I still have to work. I have to live. I have to exist out there. And it just seems like there's so much hate and negativity towards me.
On Monday, he will leave the razor wire fences and bars behind. On his release, Carruth will be handed a new photo ID, receive his personal records, and his barber's certificate. The state will have reviewed his living plans and what he intends to do for work. He will walk out a free man, 44 years old. In his most recent prison photo, we see an older man with gray in his goatee and a slight smile. For the next 18 months, Carruth will be in what the prison system refers to as post-release. During that time, he'll communicate with a caseworker and work on transitioning from inmate to public citizen.
So what's next for Rae Carruth? Honestly, that's up to him. After that post-release period, he's free to live wherever he wants. What is still unclear, though, is whether Chancellor Lee will be a part of his life. Sandra Adams knows she won't be around forever to take care of Chancellor. She has a plan in place for family to take over someday. Tonight, we leave you with her words, a message for Chancellor as he continues his journey.
You're doing good, though.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What I'm hoping is it not that he will see Rae and see some evil person that killed his mom. I want him to see the goodness in his dad. So that he knows that there's no bad in Chancellor. And I want him to feel that. And I want him to embrace that. You're gonna blow a kiss to the ladies.
Our coverage of this important story continues right on your television. Download the free WSOC-TV app for Apple TV, Amazon Fire, or Roku to watch raw interviews from tonight's program, an extensive look at the evidence, hours of original coverage from the Eyewitness News archives, and my extended conversation with Mark Becker and Glenn Counts. Download the app and look for Life After Death, Rae Carruth, and the son who survived.